the word we talked about when we started talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that I think very much applies to the book of Exodus, if you remember, is pneumohistory. Okay. This idea of creating a meaningful narrative that is more focused on shaping the current and future generations than it is about just recounting past ones. Yeah. This is a story that is more focused on shaping current and future generations than it is on just telling about past ones.
Future and current situations.
Can you write it down?
Generations. Yeah, it would take me forever. So we can say, we'll just say focused on current and future generations, not, focus on shaping. Not recounting past generations. Okay. Think about, in a sense, how we talk about the American Revolution. Okay? When we talk about the American Revolution, a lot of times how these stories get told are in a way that embodies what we consider to be the American ideal. Right? Freedom and independence and throwing off the bonds of, taxation and all these kinds of things. Like all of these ways that we narrate what it means to be what it means to be an American, we write into how we tell the American Revolution. Right? Because how we tell that story, in some sense, is in an attempt to shape our current and future generations into what it means to be a good American. Right? Does that kind of make sense? Even think about how we have certain characters in those stories that, even though they may not have played as significant a role in the actual events, we kind of elevate through our storytelling, right? Like Paul Revere, like George Washington, right? These figures kind of take this legendary status when we tell these stories. And this is kind of how the Exodus is operating, right? This is a story that might have some kind of significant or some kind of historical basis. But really the story is being told, in a sense, to shape these future generations to understand who they are and where they came from. Okay? Because what's really beautiful about Exodus is that this is, in a sense, Israel's birth story. You can maybe think of the book of Genesis as the gestation period, right? But it's really Exodus that we see the birth of Israel. And we see that not just in this kind of broad thematic sense, but in very poignant senses and in very specific allusions that get made in the text and very specific imagery that gets used. We can see how Israel is kind of narrating its own birth story through the Exodus. If we were looking at a birth story, what kind of things in Genesis do you think would be relevant to think back to? What kind of things should we keep in mind for thinking, okay, it's a birth story, what kind of themes might they be hearkening back to and using if they're telling their birth story?
Inception.
Huh?
Inception.
Whose?
Israel.
Well, you mean Jacob's? Or, so if we're talking about, remember we're talking about, if they're telling their birth story in Exodus, what kind of themes from Genesis might they be pulling from?
Their forefathers.
Okay.
Yeah, genealogy.
So they're going to, let's say, connect back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
Good. What else? What else would be, could maybe some themes they could use for a birth story?
In the womb.
Womb? What kind of imagery do we have with wombs?
The grasping of the youth.
What's that?
Fill, multiply, we're fruitful and multiply and fill.
Okay. we've got fruitful and multiply. That's in Genesis. What? Expound on the womb idea for a little bit for me.
When the two brothers were in the womb,
Okay. Yeah, you had Jacob and Esau in the
trying to
wombs.
gain the birthright.
You
trying to-
struggle.
Struggle. Good. Let's think about womb a little bit. What is maybe some imagery outside of the Bible that we can think of with wombs?
Safe and warm.
Okay. That's fair.
Development.
Development. I'm gonna throw in this idea, and you can tell me I'm crazy or not. But the idea of water.
Okay.
Okay. Being born.
Also creation, yeah.
Oh, okay. I see how it's
Right. Okay, so we'll come back to that. Okay. So these are some themes that they're going to be pulling on, and we'll see these pop up. Right? We're going to see some of them today and some tomorrow. Now, another thing to consider when we're talking about why we're looking at Exodus as maybe pneumo history is considering when the book's written. Okay, a lot of the Torah we think was written during the Babylonian exile. Right? Remember we said this. So the people of Israel are in exile, and they're compiling and writing these stories. Okay, why would it be important to tell this kind of story if you're in exile?
You're in exile, you're in a strange land, and you need to know where you come from, and perhaps what led up to you being there in exile.
Good.
You want to give people hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been here before.
Yeah, so we have this question of identity. Who are we? Where did we come from? Right? Is there hope? Right? We talked about that idea of hope with Isaac. Right? By God providing that land up. Please let there be a way out of this. Right? Good. Yeah, and think about if you are away from your land, right? If you're in exile, those typical ways you have of worshiping and identifying. It's like, oh, we are the people of Israel because we have the temple in Jerusalem. We're the people of Israel because we do these sacrifices. We're the people of Israel because we have this priestly class. Like all these typical ways of orienting yourself and being like, oh, I know I am, a North Carolinian because I see all of North Carolina around me. Once you're away from that, how do you still remember who you are and understand yourself? Right? So we can say, in a sense, absence of how do I want to put it? Anybody ideas? Right. We just say absence of the familiar. Right? You no longer have those things that you can look to and pull your identity from anymore. Think about if any of you have ever gone to a foreign country. Right? You're like, oh, like this is different from who I am. It's not bad, it's just different. Right? So telling this kind of story is going to provide all of this. Right? And it's why it's important to tell a story that's not just focused on where you've been or like the past, but making sure you shape future generations in the absence of what's familiar, right? In order to give them hope, in order to shape that identity. Good. So let's watch a video now. If I can find it out to my marker somewhere. It's probably in my pocket. Yep. About the historical background of the Exodus. You guys will have to ignore, oh good, the flying little angels up in the black spot is probably better. Okay.